All right. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Thank you. Just having lots of fun, and that's what Rotary is about, but we do need to come back in. But it is good to have all this conversation going on, and I love the networking. That's one of the things Rotary is all about. I want to ask Ken Cooley to come up here just a second. He is our public relation person. And he's going to explain how we can go and find this meeting back online.
Thank you. Are we having fun? Gotcha. So a couple of really neat things that I do. If you guys are familiar, how many people have ever used YouTube? That looks pretty much like everybody in the room, right? We are currently live streaming this meeting on YouTube right now. You can actually go, you can see, this is going to be part 2. You can see my giant eyeball. Go to YouTube, Google, or go to YouTube and type in the search District 6510. Our district page channel will be in the search. You can see all the videos that we downloaded in the past year, all of my interviews, a lot of these meetings as well. And the really cool thing about that is that we are going to take some of these presentations and edit them. We're going to take the presentations today and edit them. We're going to make them so they're shorter. You can share them with your club at your meetings. Also look up the 2 Rotarians. Shameless plug, I apologize. I do a podcast once a month that has me and my buddy David Cobb. You can look that up. You can see us. We talk about Rotary, sports, blues hockey, you name it. All the good works that we're doing in the community. The last thing I want to tell you is that we are going to put together a press release for today that will, we're going to make it easy peasy for you guys. We're just going to add some stuff, leave it blank, and then you guys can take a picture of yourself here at the assembly or what have you and send that off to your local newspapers.
Where were they going to find the press release?
I am going to send it out. And I will make that happen, and we'll make that available on the district Facebook page as well as an email. And I think that's it.
Okay.
Thank you.
As you all know, for those of you who've been through your official visit with me, as in Pre-Pat's District Assembly, it's all about getting our message out there. It's all about marketing. And, you know, we have to do it for people go to find information. And that means technology, no matter how some of us may hate that. That's what it means. So we are coming up. Okay, this part of our morning session is about foundation, and I'm going to ask Lanny to come up and take over.
Actually, I need to stay here.
Okay.
This is my little corner of the world. Carl just found out that I am a math teacher. And Carl this morning inspired me to throw a few more numbers at you.
Oh boy.
I'm going to start with these 3 numbers. 3 years, 50%, and 1/2. And what does that have to do with the foundation? Well, when we, singular, plural, take your choice, give money to the Rotary Foundation Annual Fund, it goes on investment for 3 years. And at the end of that 3 years, 50% of 6510's part of the money comes back to 6510. But it gets split up half and half. Half for district grants, half for global grants. District grants, checking account, we actually have. The Global Grants checking account we don't have, it's electronic and it's sitting in Evanston. We authorize payments out of that Global Grants fund, and those are made electronically for us. This afternoon I'm going to be talking about district grants. This morning I'm going to talk a little about something that we really don't talk that much about, the global grant side. And what you have, speaking of math teacher and numbers and spreadsheets, trying to find a nice consolidated summary of our 6510 involvement in global grants is not easy. I had to create that spreadsheet, and unfortunately it doesn't have descriptors, it just has GG numbers down there, but I wanted to kind of go through a few of these numbers. And I'm going to have to sit down so I can scroll to do this. Start at the top. Global carryover from the previous year. By the way, this is 17-18, the year that just concluded. And you're going to see, in effect, where our money comes from at the top, and then how we spend it at the lower parts of this spreadsheet. Carryover from 16-17 is just that. It's money that we didn't spend on global grants from the previous, actually more than 1 year. Nice thing about global grant money is it will roll over. District grant money can't roll over. More about that in a few seconds. This next line is kind of unusual, that in terms of global grant return money, that H to H is reference to a heart-to-heart, which is a program that we've been involved in for several years now. It stands for Heart of America and Heart of Mexico. We got involved in Heart-to-Heart through friendships with a gentleman named Ron Apoon, whose wife, Karen Wentz, just retired from the Rotary Board and was replaced by Greg Yank. They had put together a draft of one particular grant. We had pledged $4,500 for it. The grant fell through, was not approved. So they returned that money to our account as income. The next line, remember I said a couple seconds ago that you have to use district grant money, you can't roll it over? Well, you can't roll it over from year to year, but we returned $1,839 of district grant money, which was in a contingency fund, sort of one of those emergency line items for it. We didn't need to use it for emergency purposes, so we have to give it back to Rotary, but Rotary just turns around and puts it on the global grant side for us. So any money that we return from our district grant unused funds rolls over to the global grant side, which is what happened there. And then new global grant funds from 3 years before. Remember I started out saying 3 years? That money goes on investment. The nice thing about that is everybody, from the highest echelon of Rotary down to 6510, we get 3 years to plan and budget. I already know how much money I'll have available next year and the year after that, because of that 3-year cycle. All right? And you'll hear more talk about that this afternoon. So basically then, total funds available for 17-18. And then you start to see groupings down here of how we spent it. These monies right here were actually spent. And then I'm going to sort of piggyback on a word that Carl used when he was talking about expectancies in the endowment fund. I'm almost tempted, Carl, correct me if I'm way off base on this.
Oh, I will.
Yes, I had dinner with him last night and he will. Expectancies kind of floats up here in the ether somewhere. I'd almost like to call it pledges. Pledges to the endowment fund that people have made. All right? So the money on top that's highlighted right now is money we absolutely spent, and this money down here, I use the word committed in this sense. Money that we pledged to spend, but the grant writing wasn't far enough along yet to actually spend it. So, in effect, that's how last year unfolded. Now, for the current year, for 18-19, we have currently, and that will change, 7 grants. One, and I don't have a slide for this, I'm gonna have to read some of these figures to you. One has already been paid, and it's a $2,000 payment for a master's degree in international relations, part of the Peace Fellow process, to a young woman named Kimberly Foster, who will be getting a master's degree. That money has already been spent. Then I have 6 more grants, most of them related to heart in Mexico, but not all, that are, Rotary's word is tagged. In effect, we've notified, we've committed to Rotary that we will be spending money. The total of these 6 grants is $25,500. If you notice that rollover money on that screen, we'll probably be able to spend somewhere between $60,000 and $70,000 on local grants during Janice's year. We could go a little higher than that, but we'll actually have $100,000 available to us between the rollover and the new money coming in. Okay? So right now we've committed to $25,000, and we'll have more. I'm tempted to ask Janice, and Jill is in the room, I know, and Dave is in the room. How many requests per month does the district governor get from other districts requesting funding?
Lots.
Yeah, lots. We need to do some serious due diligence on some of those requests, or all of those requests, really, before we commit money. For this coming year, for Janice's year, the largest single grant that we have committed to is $7,500. It is part of the Heart to Heart for an international peace conference in Mexico City, trying to build some stability and peace throughout Mexico, throughout 7 states of central Mexico. We have a grant for education and anti-bullying and gender sensitivity in the Hidalgo province in Mexico for $1,500. We have a pacemaker program, and this one has been ongoing. They write a new grant every year for this one. The Vicky Blade pacemaker. We're committing $5,000 to that. The Amica River Cleanup Project in Jalisco province is $5,000. A firewood oven bread making project, economic development in Ixtapa for $4,000. And I mentioned the Peace Conference for $7,500, and an organic farming training project. This one actually is in Serbia, in Belgrade. And that one we've committed $2,500 for. We will be looking for other global grant requests that we think are worthy of our consideration. I can tell you, this is hard. Writing a global grant is a very difficult proposition. I'm only aware of 2 global grants that 6510 has ever started the writing on. One of them, Harry Henderson started for an ophthalmic van in India, and more recently, Malawi water project, which totaled about $90,000. And that we're still spending that money. It's not completed yet. The final report is due next year. If clubs are interested in starting a global project, we have some expertise. Mike Novobilski is one of them. It takes a lot of diligence to write the project. How many of you have written a district grant on DATDB? Well, a global grant on the Rotary website multiplied by about 7. In terms of the sophistication and difficulty and detail that they require, not just budgetary. Probably the top word on their vocabulary list at RI is sustainability, question mark. If you can't document some version of sustainability on a global project, don't even try to write it. But then, the other hard part is developing partners, because most of these global grants, the amount of money I said we're kicking in on these projects, Most of these are $150,000 projects, so where do you think they're getting the rest of that money? Other districts. There may be 30 districts that have chunked in and said, yeah, count us in for 2,500. Count us in for 5,000. Now, if you're going to start the project, then it's your responsibility to go out fishing, hunting for those partners to come up with the full funding. Okay? Are there any other questions on the global grant side that you would like to know more information about? Yes, Mary.
Basically, how do you get started? I've got a Rotarian in our club who's got a wonderful global project. How do I start this?
If you log into Rotary.org and go to hover over the Rotary Foundation button, you get a little pop-up, or if you're on a drop-down. Go to the Grant Center, which is lower left-hand corner.
Okay.
And once you get there, you'll see a menu of about 5 choices. And one of them would be to start a global grant. You probably need to start literally just printing out the blanks to see what kinds of questions are going to be asked to be answered. But that's the doorway to get into the start of it. Yeah, Rotary Foundation, Grant Center, and then just kind of search for the one that says start a grant. I look at one on that menu that says my grants, so I can see where we stand on authorizations and so forth.
Lanny?
Yes.
So since the Malawi project is a 6510 project, how much money do we put into that?
I believe we committed $15,000 of our own district or our own global grant money and went out for partnerships on the rest of it. So we have substantial money available right now. I think I would be safe to say if somebody wanted to go into that Rotary, start a global grant right up tomorrow, it would be difficult to have it done by June for submission and approval. It's a lengthy process. Doesn't happen in a month. I don't think I've ever seen a grant written in a month and submitted and accepted. They're sticklers for detail before they'll say, okay.
Lanny,
Yes.
for the global grants, one of the things that, if they're writing one, you've got to have that relationship with a club in the area that you're writing the grant to. And that's a lot of times the issue, is getting that club certified to handle the money. Because if that club has not handled money before or has not handled it correctly, you don't get the money. It's just not you, it's your partner.
Yeah, and that's a very valid point.
So a lot of times that's the problem.
It needs to be a working relationship of trust there, not trust from a distance, but trust up close.
Yeah.
So that you know that if it's a $150,000 project, that you're going to have good record keeping on it and accountability. I was going to say this afternoon, but I might as well bring it up now. How many of you have filled out and signed our district grant memorandum of understanding, also known as the MOU? Locally, that MOU is 2 pages long plus a signature page. Janice and I, and Gary Ham, signed the Global Grants MOU, which is 5 pages long in signatures. And I only point that out in terms of the stickler for detail side on the global grant side of this whole thing. That they need confidence that you're going to handle big money correctly. All right? If there are no other questions, I think we're ready to move forward. We have one more question.
If you want international grant, how many years do you have to work to put it together?
That's one nice thing, actually. It's on a rolling time schedule. You can, not like district grants where we say you have to write it in March and we approve it in April and it has to be done by February. district grants are on a totally free-flowing, rolling basis. You can start them anytime. It may take you 12, 14 months to finish writing and re-answering questions that Rotary asks. When they finally accept it, in the write-up, you've got a timeline that you can fill out as to how long it will take to actually do the grant complete. So it may be a 2.5-year project not from the actual write-up, but from the acceptance, when the money starts flowing. So yeah, it's fairly open-ended there, so that's good for you.
Lanny,
Yes?
got a question for you over here. Is there a place you can find out where other clubs are looking for partners to partner with them for a global grant? Is there some place to access that?
I wish I could remember the exact website name right now. The answer is yes.
You can also go to Heart to Heart.
It's on My Rotary, and it's under Foundation.
It is in the foundation section?
Yeah, and you can find partners, or you can go to the different menu options in My Rotary. Or you can just put Google partners, grant partners, but it's all right in there, and it's great if anybody wants to see it, I'll pull it up.
There are several.
Or you can just talk to Mount Vernon, because we want to begin working on one.
I saw another hand somewhere flicker. Where was that? Anything else? All right. We'll move on. We're back in session, and it's time to bring Carl back up. I don't know if this is a dangerous thing or not, but your tabletop is clear.
Let me back up just for a minute on beyond the zebra in terms of membership. You know, membership in the club works best if the whole club is involved. In the manual of procedure, which district governors are familiar with, it's kind of the Bible of Rotary. Years ago it described what's called a 5-for-1 plan. How many of you are familiar with the 5-for-1 plan? It works. What you do is you take your club and you divide your club into 5 members per team. So if you have 25 members in your club, you have 5 teams. Each one of those teams is obligated to bring in 1 member during the next year. Well, now think about that. They get together, they talk, they work together, they look at different occupations, and it does work. They bring in 1 new member. And some of them will bring in more than 1, and you can have competitions, you can do anything you want to. But look at the numbers. Automatically, you've increased your club by 20%. Now, you're going to have some drops. So, if you drop even 10%, you still gain 10%. And like any program, it probably has a life cycle. And I found the life cycle for the 5-for-1 program probably goes for 2 to 3 years. But if you do that, automatically you've increased the size of your club overnight. The other thing that we've been successful in is challenging other clubs in membership. And you can do it with clubs of different size, because what you do is you take the July 1st number of a club, of each one of the clubs, the challenging clubs, and then you take the number at June 30th the next year, and percentage-wise you see who's won. And then the loser has to pay $200 to the foundation. Well, what club can't afford $200? And you have a lot of fun with it, because you go to the other club and you hit on them and tell them how bad they are, and some of those really good things. But anyway, I just thought I'd throw you out a couple examples that have worked for our club really well. We have challenged 6 clubs over the last several years, and each time, each club has gained membership. Currently, we have challenged 3 clubs this year, and we're going to whip them. Now let's share some of the words of that great theologian of our time, Dr. Theodore Seuss Geisel, who coined the following prayer. From here on earth, from my small place, I ask you way out in space. Please tell all men in every land what you and I both understand. Please tell all men that peace is good. That's all that need be understood. In every world, in your great sky, we understand, both you and I. Our theme for this presentation today is passion. Or, how can we go beyond zebra? In 2005, Rotary's 100th anniversary, David Forward wrote the book, A Century of Service. In that book, David wrote as follows: even the world's mightiest rivers have humble beginnings. They start as tiny springs, bubbling to the surface as a single melting snowdrop. As the rivulet trickles down, it brings new life to everything it touches. Soon other tiny streams join the path, and together they unite as a river, ever more confident and forceful. 113 years ago, in 1905, the river called Rotary was born. Peace has always been a theme of Rotary. Paul Harris, our founder, started the Rotary bedrock emphasis of peace and patience. Our Rotary Foundation, a dream of Arch Clump, became reality in 1917 as an extension of Rotary International. Peace is also the heart and soul of our foundation. What is your passion? There is a multitude of ways we can exercise peace through service. So let's look at a few examples. These are ways we can engage in Rotary to change lives and be a gift to the world. Each example can fit neatly into one of the 6 areas of focus which we've already covered. Those being peace and conflict resolution, disease prevention and treatment, water and sanitation, maternal and child health, basic education and literacy, economic and community development. So literacy. Dolly Parton, who is a Rotary Paul Harris Fellow, established the Imagination Library. I see you nodding. As a part of her Dollywood Foundation. The goal of her foundation is to provide 1 book a month in the home of a child from birth to kindergarten. So far, over 100 million books have been delivered. Dolly considers this her greatest accomplishment. She says her proudest moment came when her father, who had always regretted he could not read himself, said he was proud of her because kids called her the book lady. Some of you may be familiar with the little free libraries that you might see around town. The little free libraries were started by a Wisconsin Rotarian. And his goal was to put 7,500 little free libraries across the country, which is the same number of libraries that Carnegie put across the country. Over 85,000 have now been installed. Many Rotary clubs distribute dictionaries to elementary school children or read books to them at libraries and schools. Literacy plays a key role in healthy and productive lives. Peace. The Rotary Peace Centers are an obvious example of peace through service. Some examples of service are highlighted by our peace scholars. Richelieu Allison has served as an election monitor in war-torn Freetown, Sierra Leone. Kobe Williams, who ran with a violent gang in Chicago, selling drugs, and who served 12 years in prison, now works for a violence prevention program called Ceasefire. Pat Yang lives in Cambodia, where once the Khmer Rouge killed over 2 million people. He now works with women and children who need access to education and health in a country where such privileges traditionally are reserved for men and older people. Katio de Melo Dantas helps stop sexual abuse against children, including pornography, human trafficking, and abduction in Brasilia. Economic and community development. Another area of focus is economic and community development. Microfinancing is a way we can all be peace fellows. By donating small amounts, loans can be made to help others help themselves. A $4 loan to an Indian woman allowed her to buy a comb, mirror, and scissors to put her husband to work as a barber. The couple paid back the loan with interest and used the profits to send their children to school. Others have received loans to buy sewing machines, to buy baking materials to start bakeries, to buy yarn for making hats and scarves. A Rotary Club in India that I visited built toilets in the local schools so young girls would not be embarrassed to go to school. Attendance skyrocketed. What about the peace girl called Mem? The rebel militia shot her and her family, citizens of Sierra Leone. Then, using a machete, they hacked off her arm. Today, at age 16, she plays soccer in suburban Washington, D.C. as a result of a Staten Island processist and a group of steadfast Rotarians. 5 Rotary clubs, through their charity Gifts of Limbs, arranged political asylum for her through Friends of Sierra Leone, organized the medical care, treatment, schooling, and housing for her. Peace through service. Disease prevention and treatment. Mother Teresa wrote, "May God bless you for saving our children from polio." We forget our history. Polio has been with us for thousands of years. There are hieroglyphics in the pyramids in Egypt about polio victims. It's been such a short period of time since we've had the vaccines available. The Salk trials were in 1954. The Salk vaccine came in 1955. The Sabine vaccine came in 1960. So in that very short period of time, we've almost eradicated this dread, awful, evil, ugly, nasty disease called polio. And Rotary has been the spearhead. But let's go back to America, where we have not had polio since 1977. To Wytheville, Virginia. The summer of 1950 was bad for Wytheville, Virginia. Motorists sped through town with their windows rolled up, bandanas covering their faces. The swimming pools closed, and then the movie theater. The draft board closed, even with war exploding in Korea. Polio had struck. Almost 200 people came down with crippling cases of polio in this close-knit community of 5,500. 23 residents died. In Wythe County, 1950 became known as the summer without children. Swings hung listlessly in empty playgrounds as children entertained themselves with board games, reading and listening to radio stories. The fear of contagion was so great that mothers baked their newspapers before allowing anyone to read them. No one knew where polio came from or how it spread. We now know polio spreads through contact with infected phlegm or feces. But back then, rumors ran rampant. People around the nation began weighing in with possible causes. The water supply, soil quality, dairy products, flies, mosquitoes, and even butterflies took the blame. One fellow from a neighboring county suggested the plague had struck Whiteville as punishment for its ABC liquor store. Businesses remained open, even with few customers. About the only ones busy were doctors, who worked nearly around the clock, and the 2 funeral homes who turned their hearses into ambulances. Some trips carried so many patient passengers that drivers would lay them crosswise. In 1954, Jonas Salk developed a polio vaccine, and in 1963, Albert Sabin developed an oral vaccine. In 2 years, there were only 65 cases of polio in the nation, and none since 1977. On my trip to India in 2012, I saw Rotarian doctors donating their time to perform post-polio corrective surgeries on hundreds of children. How many of you have been on a National Immunization Day? Well, they're still going on, so it's not over. These experiences bring to life the horrific, evil effects of infantile paralysis, i.e. polio. The National Immunization Day usually starts days before the distribution of the vaccine, with an immersion in the country and region where the life-saving polio drops are administered. These are important days since it gives a personal meaning of the people, how they live, and how polio has affected them. So let's start on our journey and visit India, February 2012, a travelogue through New Delhi, Old Delhi, Agra, Calcutta, and Dhanbad. This is a picture of the outside of a soup kitchen that serves, and we'll see pictures of how many people it serves in just a minute. This picture is not very clear, but there are 10,000 people a day that go through this facility to receive soup and bread. And here's the soup being made, and here's the flatbread. And it's really quite tasty. Would you love to drink some of that? As I said, it's really good. Okay. And here's another picture of people in the soup kitchen eating. Anybody guess what this statue is? Mahatma Gandhi, who of course is still revered throughout India. A typical street scene that we're going to see many of. This is in Old Delhi. Old Delhi was there before the British came in and created the new city of New Delhi. This is a street looking for an electrician. Can you just imagine that in your yard? Oh my God. Another picture of that electrical mess. And you'll see that the screen, the pictures look a little fuzzy. You know, we think we have problems with our air quality. That is what you see. None of the pictures, and I was confused because my camera takes really sharp pictures. But when I got home, I recognized that that's what it's like in India. This is a picture of outside the bus. They're taking a a dead body down the street, right in the middle of the street. And here's what we're trying to eliminate. And that's not an unusual picture throughout India. Two good-looking guys. Another street scene. And again, see how fuzzy the picture is? And here are the logistics. For just one day, can you read that? 709 vaccine booths, 2,500,000 vaccinators, 1,170,000 vaccine teams. Well, you can read the rest. The bottom, 174 million children immunized in one day in India alone. Another typical street scene. See how clear a day it is? This is interesting. We saw trucks like this, and I wondered why in the world they looked so funny with the engine. And the engine is a water pump, and because they tax the normal engines, so they find these water pumps to push the trucks around. Now we're going to get into Taj Mahal. And this is a picture taken inside the bus. The things that you cannot do in Taj Mahal. And if you can find something that you can do, let me know. And here's the entry to Taj Mahal that really is just as elaborate and beautiful as the Taj itself. And then we go through the middle entrance, and here's the first scene that you see. And it is just as gorgeous as you think. Here's the team that went over for this National Immunization Day from the U.S. Can anybody see why I took a picture here? Look on the roof. Monkeys are everywhere.
There he is.
Now we're outside Queen Victoria's garden. It's a beautiful garden, and this garden is maintained by a Rotary Club. So if you ever think you're not doing a big enough project, just think about your Rotary Club maintaining a garden this size. All right, now, this is another guessing game. We're walking down the street, and we turn the corner, and what do we see? On the right, there's a door. It says 55A. And that is the only thing that you will find to identify where her facility is. And inside, here's a prayer that she wrote. Sounds like Rotary, doesn't it? And this is the simple little altar inside Mother Teresa's compound. Now we're outside again. They have no idea what a dump is, because a dump is everywhere. We were eating lunch one place, and I finished with my sandwich, and I asked one of the Indians with us where I should put the paper, and he says, "Oh, just throw it over there behind the bench." And I looked back there, and it was just filled with other papers. But this is a typical street scene. And here are some men playing some kind of a game. How would you like to drink that lemonade? Another guess. What might this be?
Train station.
It's a pharmacy. That's the waiting line for that day.
Oh, wow.
So if you're going to complain about waiting for your prescription, just remember this picture. Some boys behind by the river. There's the river, and they're up the other upper left. And this is a marriage. They've just been wedded. We're now going to visit inside a hospital. And I took this picture because those are men who have received open heart surgery that morning. That whole ward was filled with men who had been opened up, their chests opened up that morning. And I'm thinking, how long would we last with those sanitary conditions? Their immune system must just be built up like ours isn't. And here we are on the immunization day, giving drops to the kids. The vaccine has to be kept at a certain temperature, or otherwise it goes bad, or stale, so it has to be thrown out. So these are the boxes that they're kept in, just coolers. Anybody guess what this is? It's going to be firewood. It's dung that's been plastered on the wall, and you can see their fingerprints. When you go on a National Immunization Day, the first day you've seen where the drops are given, and then the purple, the finger is painted purple so that we know who has received that vaccine that day. But some of them are missed because there's so many kids. And so the next day is called a mop-up day, and we actually walk through the village to find kids who have been missed. And here's another scene just as we're walking along. And here's the team. Now, one of the visitations we made was to a hospital where they're doing corrective surgery on polio victims. This little girl, we found out, had been there before. And by the way, we didn't see any adults. All these kids get there somehow or another, and then they're left there to deal with their medical problems all day long. And this little girl had been there before, and her corrective surgery had not taken. So she's going to have to go back in, and then we're going to see her in a little while. She's on the left. She walked in alone. She climbed up on the operating table alone, and she was cheerful, as you might imagine. One of the team members went over and comforted her and did what they could. But we're walking around the operating room with our street clothes on. We can watch anything that they're doing. And here's one of his leg, you can see how it's bent. That's the way the leg is. And what they're going to do is they're going to go in, open it up, and take a chisel and make a V with a hammer and chisel, and then push the leg straight. And then let it heal that way. And how the kids get home, I don't have any idea. I need to find my place. Let me give you my example. So we're going to come back home a little bit even more. Let us mentally transport ourselves back to 1942 and enter the home and life of our one family. The home belongs to a couple named George and artist Chinnery, my parents, and their 5 young boys, George, age 9, Bill, 7, Richard, 5, Larry, 4, and Carl, age 1. Life had been good for this family of 7. They have moved to the area 2 years earlier, and George has been promoted to be a 1/3 owner of a regionally important manufacturing company in Kansas City. To get right into the picture, I want to read a letter written by the mother, my mother, when she was 89. This is not some mythical story. It is a story about me and my family, a typical family from the heart of America. Dear Carl, this is very hard for me, but you asked me and just maybe it will help someone else. It must have been August 7th, 1942, when Bill came in and announced he had poliomyelitis. I didn't know where he'd heard of such, but I said, if you had poliomyelitis, you go straight up to bed and stay there. And he did. He really did feel bad. We did the usual things to care of a sick person. He stayed in bed at least a couple of days, and then George became ill. I called Dr. Eldridge, our pediatrician, and he came in several times, but didn't give the illness a name until the night of August 11th. George couldn't swallow his medication. It came back up through his nose. I called the doctor again, and he came right over. Dad was on the road, selling. I don't remember who stayed with the others, but Dr. Eldridge took George and me to Old General Hospital. They took George, but wouldn't let me stay at all. No other hospital in Kansas City would accept us. I sputtered, but they wouldn't even let me go to see George. I went home and called Dad. He started home immediately, drove all night, and went to the hospital about 4 a.m., but they wouldn't let him in either. He came home at about 7 a.m. The hospital called us and said George was dying. Come immediately, which we did. When we arrived, George was already gone. He was tied to the bed, feet at each corner of the bed, hands over his head and fastened to each corner, stripped naked. We stayed in his room as long as they would let us, and of course, Dad had to make arrangements, which he did. I firmly believe George probably would have passed away anyway, as he had bulbar polio, the most virulent strain, and probably choked on his own juices. However, I will also believe the treatment he received at the hospital killed him just as much as the disease. I believe he was frightened to death and would always think so. By that time, Richard, Larry, and Carl had also become sick. And when I got home from the hospital, Richard was much worse, and we rushed him to the hospital. When we marched in, I informed them I was staying. I had lost one child, and I was staying no matter what. Well, I did. I don't remember how long, but Dad and I took turns, so Richard always had one of us there. One of Dad's aunts had come to help us and stayed with Bill, Larry, and Carl. Carl was an infant and stayed in his crib much of the time. An intern was watching Richard and doing a pretty good job. Dad sent someone to get me to go to the funeral to see George, but I wasn't able to go to the funeral at all. When I got back home, got back to the hospital, Richard wasn't doing well. And in the night, during the intern's coffee break, I saw Richard's skin sink into his chest. All I could see were bones covered with skin drawn tight. I ran as fast as I could down the hall, calling the intern. He joined me and we ran back to Richard. And this man picked Richard up and plunked him into an iron lung. He didn't even get ready. However, he didn't fight it, but breathed along with it. His lungs had collapsed. The radio stations throughout Kansas City put out a call for anyone who had had polio to please go to the hospital and give blood to save this little boy's life. One young man or boy answered and gave his blood. We never did see the boy or have any idea who he was. He had walked miles to help someone he had never heard of before. I am most grateful to this unknown person. Richard was whiter than this paper and failing. The machine was breathing for him, but when they started giving him the boy's blood, it was like a perfect miracle. His skin gradually started turning the most beautiful pink anyone has ever seen. And he started coming back. I don't remember how long we were at the hospital, but they treated us much better. When we went home, we had to start the kidney treatments. There was one nurse at the Old Children's Mercy Hospital who would give the treatments if Dad would go after her and take her back 3 times a week. Since it was wartime, gasoline was rationed, and we didn't have enough gas stamps. But people we had never heard of, and some we knew quite well, gave us stamps so we could get this nurse. We had to have the 100% wool blankets to tear into strips and put in boiling water, run through a tight wringer and place on each child for so many minutes, and then off for so many minutes, then on, etc. Dad put a hot plate in the upstairs bathroom to boil the water. He put an old wringer over the tub with the 100% wool strips handy. Bill had done better and was on his way to recovery. But Richard, Larry, and Carl were the sick ones now. Dad hired nurses to help during the day, and my dear mother drove from Concord, California to help. Plus a very loyal girl who helped me for several years who had become a WAC in the Army. She told them her family needed her and they'd let her come home. We were one busy army ourselves. When the boys were well enough, we had to start therapy, compliments of the March of Dimes. I took my children and another lady in leg braces and her little boy 3 times a week. Richard had one leg a little shorter than the other. He walked kind of crippled for a long time. Carl's chest never filled out. Bill had many problems. And of course, we have one little boy, Angel, in heaven. People came from everywhere to give us hope and offer help, but they couldn't come in the house. Post-polio syndrome is rampant now. Fatigue is the main symptom, it seems. It took 60 years for my mother to write this letter and to talk about polio. My dad never did. That's the legacy of polio. I can remember in the living room of our house over the fireplace mantel the picture of my brother with a light in front of the picture that was on 24 hours a day because he was afraid of the dark. You can well imagine how my family was turned completely by a devastating illness called polio, with 5 children contracting the disease at the same time. To help handle the medical problems, the second son was sent to Independence, Missouri, to be cared for by grandparents until the illness took its course. The help of many people brought through many and made possible the survival of the 4 remaining sons. However, the family was also quarantined from many close contacts by people who were simply afraid, and rightfully so, of the disease, afraid of how it was contracted and the possibility that it would be spread. Think how helpless we are when polio strikes. There is no cure. It can only be prevented. I encourage you to find your tool to to engage Rotary and change lives in whatever area your focus of passion might be. In Rotary, we don't divide our work by nation, culture, or language. It doesn't matter what's printed on your passport. What matters is that you believe in service above self. Your problems are my problems, and I care enough to help you. This talk began by a comparison of Rotary to a river, which David Ford had described in his book, A Century of Service. The river trickles along, picking up speed and strength. Soon other tiny rivulets surface and feed the river. The river grows in intensity until it pervades all of Rotary. In the words of that great theologian of our time, Dr. Theodore C. Skeisel, unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing's going to get better. It's not. Robert Frost, in his poem Stopping by Woods, ended it by saying, "The woods are lovely, dark, and deep. But I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep." Isn't that Rotary? We've made some mighty tall promises. We've got miles to go before we can. Thank you for being Rotarians.
I feel like standing here for 45 seconds before I say anything. In this section of today, I've been tasked to give some remarks about polio as it relates to 6510. Tempted to start, though, on the back side of Carl's message and Rotary's plea worldwide. We know that it's going to take over 1.5 billion to finish that last 0.1%. And occasionally, not often, but occasionally I hear one of those random comments that says, 99.9 is close enough, let's move on. Well, the numbers guy is going to have to jump in here again. If we decided to fold our tent on polio and move on, epidemiologists predict that within 12 months, there would be 200,000 new cases. And now the math grapher has to talk to you about epidemiology. If you follow my finger, the graph looks something like this, accelerating, accelerating, until it totally obliterates a population, and then it trails off because there are no other bodies to infect. And then it kind of trickles in. We're kind of down here now because of the immunization process, trying to finish that last 0.1%. So how is 6510 done on polio? You know that when you give, and you write polio plus in that memo line of a check that you write to the foundation, it goes right to that fight. And it's tripled by the Gates Foundation. For the year that just ended, for Jill's year, you all contributed over $73,000 in direct polio eradication efforts. And we decided at the district level to commit, this morning I talked about global grant money. We committed 18,000 of our global grant money to add to that 73,000. So we ended up with $91,000 towards polio eradication last year. After you do all the math on that $91,000, we paid for over 500,000 immunization packets for just this district. Carl alluded to the fact that this is not a singular effort. Anybody know what the initial CDC stands for? Centers for Disease Control. How about WHO? Yep. I'm not even going to spell it out. UNICEF. All partners in this process, along with the Gates Foundation. And that Gates match is still going on, by the way. Try this little map on your club. How many members do you have in your own club? Multiply by 50. Because if you want to do reverse engineering on that big number of what it takes, back that down to individuals. $50 per person. So multiply your membership times 50 once. Ask yourself, as a leader in your club, can we reach that goal for our club? By the way, have you put that number into the Rotary website as your goal for the year? Because I happen to know as of 2 days ago that half of our clubs haven't put goals in. Any goals for an annual fund or for polio. We'd like to get that caught up so Janice gets the right credit for 18-19. Carl mentioned 12 cases. There are 9 of them in Afghanistan so far, as of 2 weeks ago, 3 in Pakistan. Nigeria is a third country that is not certified as polio-free. Nigeria's been clean now for almost 2 years. But World Health Organization, I believe, is the right, and maybe it's CDC, Lynn. But in order to be declared polio-free, it takes 3 years, or is it 4?
3.
Full 3 years. So Nigeria's coming close. We still have to work in Afghanistan and Pakistan. And if you know the geography there, you know, as well as the cultural issues, you know what a fight that is in terms of trying to backpack vaccine under temperature-controlled conditions. Bill Gates, in the Atlanta convention a year ago, gave Rotary a whole lot of credit. His words basically were, Rotary, you have something that we, the Gates Foundation, will never have. You have an infrastructure in place, and you have hands and feet and boots on the ground to get that vaccine where it needs to be. We will never have that, he said. We can help you financially, but we will never have that kind of infrastructure. And by the way, he said, when we get done with polio, we hope we can use that infrastructure for other good in the world. And we already see evidence of that. If you want evidence on that, think back about 3 years ago to the Ebola outbreak and how quickly we were able to shut that down. And Rotary infrastructure had a lot to do with that. Not necessarily Rotary money, but just the infrastructure. So $50 per person is our goal for polio for this year. See if you and your club leaders can match up with that. Any other questions on the polio side? It looks like lunch is ready. Is that true, David?
Yeah, I think it could be.
All right, Janice has a couple.
Janice has to let us loose first. She's a teacher, you know.
That's right, you're in your seats until ding. I just wanted to share, those of us who were at Grand Rapids with the Rotary Youth Exchange Summit had a wonderful opportunity to have Rotary International President Barry Ransom there. And he just sort of wandered around into the small groups and spoke with us at different times. And I cannot remember which small group it was in, but one thing that he said, we talk about our fight against polio. He said that there was a Rotarian in Pakistan, and Pakistan has really taken, they want to end polio in Pakistan. And there was a Rotarian that sent a note to information, I'll say sent a note, but got the word out, that he wanted to talk to the Taliban. So men came in one day to his office, blindfolded him, let him out, put him in the car, and drove him. Finally, they got to their destination. They took him out. They let him into a building, set him down, undid the blindfold, and he was asked, "What do you want? You want to talk to us? What do you want?" He asked them to take and stop their actions for one day so all the children of Pakistan could get vaccinated. And they agreed on the day. Because he was willing to risk his life to make that connection, service above self. I don't know of any organization that's powerful. Only Rotary. What does our time say to come back? I don't know what our agenda says.
12:30.
12:30. Okay, so the line starts where Steve is standing by the door. He's got his hand up. That's where the line starts. We ask that you only take one sandwich until everybody gets through, and then you can go back and have as many more as you want. Okay, thank you.